Welcome back into the Daily Dose. I'm Jeff Hansen. The show's brought to you by GiveMLBrigham.com and by CougarSportsInsider.com, part of the 24/7 Sports Network. Appreciate your support of the show. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. If you already have, put a little fuel in that algorithm. Like, comment, subscribe, share, all of those things. Helps us out a ton. Appreciate you guys and your support. Let's jump right into it. I've got a lot of stuff to go over today. In particular, I've got stats. We're going to get a little nerdy. I've got 5 stats that I am keeping track of this year where BYU was dreadful, pitiful, terrible, awful last year, and they've got to get better this year, even if it's just average, even if it's slightly below average. BYU has to improve in these 5 areas. Otherwise, their debut season in the Big 12 could be a really, really long season. If they can improve in these 5 areas and get to an average level or better, then I think BYU can start to surprise some people in the Big 12 conference. So let's jump right into it. Number 1, BYU's opponent completion percentage, meaning how often opposing quarterbacks are completing passes. 69.47%. That's where the Cougars were a year ago. Let's call it 70% for purposes of this video. I mean, because realistically, that's like a couple of completions away from actually being 70%. That was 128th in the country. There were 131 teams in the country last year. BYU, you're not getting into the quarterback. They're not creating a whole lot of havoc. You give that much time to any Division I quarterback, they're going to find open receivers. Coverage is going to break down. Man, BYU's got to make it tougher on quarterbacks and tougher on receivers. And I think Jay Hill will do that. We've heard throughout fall camp that BYU will be aggressive and that there is a lot more physical man press coverage of cornerbacks getting into the grills of wide receivers and making it more difficult. That's huge. I don't know where BYU can go from 70% to, 62%. That's still not great, still a little below probably where Jay Hill wants them to be, but that would be huge progress compared to where BYU was last year. If they make it that easy for opposing quarterbacks and opposing wide receivers again in 2023, it's going to be a really long year. I think they have the personnel and the scheme to improve that in a hurry. But boy, they've really got to improve that in a hurry because that was a terrible performance last year. Number 2, 10.3 rushing first downs allowed. So we just established that BYU wasn't stopping anybody through the air. 70% of the time, quarterbacks were completing passes. They also weren't really stuffing the run at all either. When opponents needed a first down, they were picking up 10 first downs a game on the ground. That was 107th in the country. That's not great. Jay Hill, his defense is predicated on stopping the run. He's going to be aggressive. He's going to get after the quarterback. He wants defensive backs to jump routes and force some interceptions, but his entire scheme is predicated upon stopping the run. And stopping the run on third downs, preventing rushing first downs, that's going to be a huge part of what Jay Hill does. I don't know where BYU goes, but 7 rushing first downs allowed per game would put BYU right in the middle of the pack in the country. I think that's an attainable and an achievable goal. If they're giving up double-digit first downs on the ground and giving up 70% through the air, buckle up, brace yourselves for a 3-9, 4-8 season, because that's just not going to get it done. But if they can get to just average performance in these 2 metrics, then I think BYU is significantly better and starts to surprise some people this year. Okay, number 3 kind of ties those 2 things together. 48.15% opponent third down conversions. It's nearly a coin flip. Almost half the time that an opponent had a third down attempt, they converted it for a first down. That's tough. That's just really tough. It speaks for itself. BYU has got to force guys off of the field. They've got to force teams to pump the ball. When you're giving up 70% through the air and you're making it easy on the ground, nobody should be surprised that the third down conversion numbers are low, but they were low. So they got to get better in that area. I'd call it 40%. That would be significant improvement. And again, take BYU from 124th in the country right to the middle of the pack. Ideally, they get into the 30s. And that's when you start to look at a really good defense. But for right now, man, just get to 40%. And I'm calling that a win for year 1 under Jay Hill. Unless you thought that all of these stats were going to be defensive stats, they're not. Let's talk about offense. BYU's red zone score percentage, so that's touchdown or a field goal, 78.05% last year. So almost 8 out of 10 times they were scoring in the red zone. That was 104th in the country. That's not good. In 2021, when BYU had Tyler Algier, BYU was among the best. They scored 95% plus in the red zone. They were always converting red zone chances into points. Last year, they weren't. It dropped dramatically. Some of that was play calling. Some of that was the offensive line not getting a push. Some of that was Jaron Hall making some questionable reads. Some of that was Chris Brooks just running into the wrong gaps. I mean, there were a lot of things that went wrong in the red zone, and you could see as the year went on that Aaron Roderick and this coaching staff, they were grasping at straws. They were calling trick plays inside the 5. They were doing anything they could to try and break the funk that they were in, and it just wasn't working. Whether they passed, whether they threw, whether it was the quarterback running, whatever it was, it just didn't work with consistency. And then you tack on some kicking problems as well. And man, it was just a pretty abysmal performance in the red zone. Like I say, 104th in the country. That's not where BYU wants to be. They're capable of so much more. That can't just get back to average. BYU has to be elite in the red zone the same way they were up until 2022. They have to convert opportunities. They just don't have the talent on defense to let chances like that go on offense. They've got to convert on nearly 100% of them. So I'm calling it 95%. BYU's got to come away with points 95% of the time that they're in the red zone. If they don't, then BYU's going to have some problems. That's a big area that I'm watching. Okay, the last one gets a little bit confusing, and I don't really know what the story means, but it's something I'm going to be paying attention to. So let's go on a walk. Walk with me as we explain what this stat is. BYU's points per quarter. They were top 10, 7th in the country in the first quarter at nearly 10 points per first quarter, 9.7. They were starting out hot on offense almost every single week. They were putting teams behind early on. It was great. They were one of the best executing offenses in the first quarter in all of America. But then they got to the second quarter, and I don't know what happened, but it went from 10 points per quarter to 6 points per quarter. That was 100th in the country. I mean, just like complete other end of the spectrum. Similar story in the second half. BYU would score 8.3 points in the third quarter. Strong halftime adjustments. Good game plan. They were doing great. That was 21st in the country. And then in the fourth quarter, 5.1 points. All the way back down to a sub 100 ranking to 102nd in the country. What does this mean? I have no idea. If this was just 1 or 2 games, I think this is a metric, a stat that you just throw away. It doesn't matter. But over a 12-game season, to see BYU so good coming into the game and coming out of halftime, and then go completely the other end of the spectrum in the second and fourth quarter before the half and before the end of the game, I don't know how to explain that. I don't know if Aaron Roderick, maybe he isn't as good at making mid-quarter, mid-game adjustments as he is making halftime adjustments. I don't know. I don't know if players get tired and so they don't execute as well because they're tired. I don't know. I don't know what it is. I don't know how to quantify this, but I know that it's not great that BYU starts hot and finishes slow, right? Start hot in the game, but finish slow in the half. That's not great. Start hot in the second half, but finish slow in the fourth quarter. That's not great. So I know it's a problem. I don't even really know how to diagnose the problem, but over a full 12-game season, for the stats to be that dramatic that when it's time to close out a half or close out a game, that BYU is completely different than they were in the first or third quarter, it feels like there's something there. It feels like there's something that needs to be addressed. I'm not a coach. I don't know how. I don't know what. I don't know who needs to address it, but it's a number that I'm going to be paying attention to because it does seem to have a dramatic impact on the game. If you're not able to close out strong and really put teams away after you start out so good in the first quarter, or you come out strong in the second half, if you can't put teams away in the second and fourth quarter, well, what are we doing here? You got to be able to put teams away. So I'm going to be paying attention to it. I don't know how to fix it. I don't even really know how to diagnose it. Talk about it in the comments if you have any ideas, because I don't think there's any bad ideas at this point. It's just such a weird reality, I guess, that BYU is so different in the even-numbered quarters than they are in the odd-numbered quarters. So those are my 5 stats. BYU was sub 100 in all of the areas that I think BYU has to improve. So I'm not exactly, building rockets that go to the moon here. We're talking about pretty obvious stuff. If you're sub 100, yeah, you've got to get better. I don't think BYU has to be top 25 in these areas, but they got to be top 50, 60, 70 in some of them. If they can get to that point, then I think that the defense will hold up and be good enough. And BYU is really good in other areas, particularly on the offensive side of the ball, that I think BYU will be able to turn some heads and surprise some people in the Big 12 conference. But if not, if these performances are just who BYU is, But then brace yourselves, BYU fans. It could be a really, really long year. Thank you so much for tuning into the Daily Dose. Until next time, give them hell.